RS 24 RS 2936, and at this time I would like to withdraw that. So now we're going to open the hearing committee on, and if I understand my revisor, it's not something we have to vote on. So open the hearing on House Bill 2548, enacting the No Patient Left Alone Act to require facilities to allow in-person visitation to certain patients at hospitals, adult care homes, and hospice facilities. At this time, I'll recognize revisor Jenna Moyer.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2548 enacts the No Patient Left Alone Act. And if this sounds familiar, it's because this bill was introduced and heard last year as House Bill 2264. There was slight amendments in committee. It went to the Senate where it was changed pretty substantially, put into conference committee, and ultimately ended up being the vehicle for legislation concerning abortion. So I will go over the general terms of the bill, but not go into too much depth, hoping that you remember the gist of it. But this bill creates a new section of law with terms. Subsection B defines terms used in the bill, including essential caregiver, family members, patient, and patient care facility, which would include adult care homes, medical care facilities, and hospice facilities. Subsection C prevents or prohibits a patient care facility from taking any action to prohibit patients from receiving certain visitors, allows a patient to refuse or revoke visitation at any time. Subsection E would allow a patient care facility to adopt visitation policies and procedures. Subsection F would require a facility's visitation policies and procedures to allow in-person visitation during certain circumstances, including when a patient is terminally ill, giving birth, or a minor. Subsection G prohibits policies adopted under this section from containing more stringent infection control protocols for visitors than for direct care staff. Subsection H allows a patient care facility to adopt policies and procedures that are more strict for places like intensive care units, to modify visitation based upon the needs of the patient, and other policies related to management of in-person visitation. Subsection I requires KDG to publish the requirements of this section on their website and include a link to report allegations that a patient care facility has violated the section. Subsection G provides a patient care facility civil immunity for acts taken in compliance with this section, and subsection K clarifies that nothing in this section prohibits a patient care facility from taking actions necessary to ensure that the facility remains eligible for federal programs and reimbursement. I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jen. Are there questions for the revisor? Representative Orpeza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I heard it when you were reading it through, but does this allow the intake for a patient who is under investigation, like giving that time while they're being evaluated for Ebola, like just as an example, for CDC guidelines to kind of fall within those guidelines on restricting visitors while they're under investigation for possibly highly contagious?
Oh, so
I thought I heard you say it I thought you said H.
I mean, this would allow a patient care facility to adopt those visitation and policies and procedures that are more stringent for intensive or critical care units, or modify visitation based upon a patient's condition or need for rest. So a patient's condition would likely include.
Like as they're under investigation. Yeah. Thank you.
Which paragraph was that, Jen? I'm sorry.
This would be on page 2, subsection H. So there would be lines 38 through 43.
Well, and this would be for you, Jen, on page 3, number 4. Temporarily suspend a visitor's in-person visitation if such a visitor violates the facility's policies and procedures, and that could definitely follow under that for contagious disease.
Yeah. Thank you.
Keeping in mind, we only play attorneys. We're not attorneys up here. At least I'm not. All right, are there further questions for Jenna? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Jenna. The first conferee we have is Deanne Felt, private citizen. Welcome to committee. Hello. You'll need to turn the mic on there and tell us who you are. Oh, she left it on, she
Yes,
said. So.
it's green, so
Yeah.
anyway. Well, I might look familiar to some of you because I was here last year. So thank you, Chairwoman Landwehr, excuse me, and the members of the House and Human Services Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you again in support of now House Bill 2548. I have to say that I was surprised and a little bit disappointed when Dr. Epley called me a couple weeks ago to come and testify before you guys again. When I was here last year, I was confident that the bill was going to pass, and then I learned that it didn't, and that's why I'm here. And then when the lady before me said it had tagged on something to do with abortion, then that I about fell out of my chair right there, because that's not even close to what we're talking about. But anyway, first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Abilene, Kansas, and graduated from Abilene High School in 1983. I went to nursing school in Salina at Marymount College and graduated in 1988. And I worked in the intensive care unit at Asbury for 2.5 years, and then started working in Abilene in January of 1991. And I'm currently there still. The first 6 months I worked in the med-surg unit, and then I moved to the emergency department, and that's where I've been. I've been a manager of the ER, the OR, sterile processing, worked with some Homeland Security stuff because I was there in 2001. Anyway, in 2009, I became a nurse practitioner and continued to work in the Abilene. So I've been working for decades in the healthcare field, and what came down with COVID and everything that happened did not and could not prepare me for what I or we experienced since the pandemic, the start of the pandemic. The healthcare system was turned upside down and put in survival mode. Staff were trying to survive to help others survive. Since I work in a small hospital, I did not experience the large numbers of COVID patients on ventilators for days, fighting for their lives alone. I do know family members and friends that were scared, anxious, angry, and exhausted, waiting to get an update on their sick family member. I did not have to hold an iPad while a patient died and their family member communicated with their loved ones via a screen. All I know is that God put me here today to represent all the COVID patients who died, survived, despite being alone, family members, friends, doctors, and all other healthcare workers who have been affected by the decisions made during the pandemic. My frustrations and anxiety dramatically increased when a man from Abilene died from complications of COVID in Independence, Missouri, in February of 2022. That seems so long ago now. It's crazy, but anyway. His family told me the story about 2 people were allowed to visit at a time, even when the decisions had been made to terminate life-saving measures. So even though he did have some family members there, the rest of his family was in the parking lot in their vehicles to be as close as possible. Of course, we were hearing stories like this every day. Also, at the time, people were attending athletic events, concerts, etc., but dying patients were still being isolated. As I was walking the trails at Milford Lake one morning in February, I was anxious inside, and I decided that I could not just complain about what was happening, but I had to try to make a difference. If I was satisfied with only complaining about the problem, then I was part of that problem. And I called April Barker and asked if she could get me in touch with somebody I could visit with, and she gave me Dr. Epley's name, and also Chad Austin from the Hospital Association. And that was later in 22, and he said there was going to be the end of the session. We probably wouldn't get anything pushed through in 22, but we did in 23. There was a bill for 23, and I was here at that time. So I am still sympathetic to those who had to make the decisions early in the pandemic and those who had to implement and uphold those decisions. We were in uncharted territory, and there was not enough PPE to provide workers with what they needed to protect themselves along with the families. But that problem had improved, but the restrictions continued. It was horrible, and I pray that we never have a situation like that again. I started to look up statistics on how many cases of COVID there were in Kansas at that time, and then I realized it really didn't matter because we needed to be thinking about each person that was going through that and was living through that, and people that had died during the pandemic and it affected. We needed to make something happen for the ones that might come in the future. And I have reviewed the new proposed bill, and I support the decision to allow all hospitals to implement its own policies regarding visitation. Blanket mandates are not one size fits all. Each facility knows its capabilities and deserves to have the power best to serve its community. Over the years, I have seen many patients who have close friends that are just as important as family. Some distant relation are just as important as immediate family, as stated in the bill. And so I would like in your discussions if you would consider not only just limiting that to immediate family, because there's definitely sometimes a friend or whatever is just as closer than a sister or brother. Lastly, I would ask that the committee amend section prohibit a patient who is terminally ill or receiving end-of-life care from receiving in-person visitation from at least 2 individuals. Again, I feel like there needs to be more than that. If I'm dying and I want my family with me, I want everybody to be together. So as you've listened to me today, I would just like each of you, to ask yourself, would I be comfortable or okay with not being with my loved one in their final hours? Or if it was you, do you not want to be with your loved one in your final hours or their final hours? Because that's what, if we don't agree with this, that's what you're saying, that you're okay with it. In closing, I want to thank Dr. Epley for hearing my voice regarding concerns and my experiences. I hope that by listening today, even though I'm only one person, you know there are thousands who would echo the same. Those still working in healthcare despite being short-staffed and are warriors. They're warriors for the love of people. To watch a person die alone is more than we can take. I know that you guys can make this bill a reality. Thank you.
All right, thank you, and Deanne, we'll take questions after we get through our proponents.
Okay.
Thank you. Next, I have Rochelle Colombo, Executive Director of Kansas Medical Society. Welcome to committee.
Good morning, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Rochelle Colombo. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Medical Society. We represent physicians statewide of every specialty, and we are here in support today of House Bill 2548. As you all were told correctly by the reviser, this bill passed out of the House committee and was lost in the conference process. We believe in the time since it was introduced, and through that process, it's been improved upon. We had some concerns not about the intention of the bill. We understand the concern to make sure that patients have access to be with their loved ones when they are terminally ill, but that those concerns, those desires need to be balanced with the best outcomes for patients and for the other individuals that are maybe in the hospital at that time. And we believe this is a carefully constructed, appropriate bill, and we would support it and believe it is reasonable. I don't need to belabor it since it's already come through this committee once before, but I'd be happy to stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Next, I have Kylie Childs, Director of Government Affairs, Leading Age Kansas. Welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kylie Childs. I'm the Director of Government Affairs with Leading Age Kansas. Leading Age Kansas is a state association of over 150 nonprofit and mission-driven aging services providers that are offering an array of services across the state. So thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 2548. So you all have my written testimony in front of you. I'll give a quick recap from our perspective on this bill. Last year, when this bill was introduced, we did have some concerns because the public health emergency had not yet ended, and we were concerned about the implications for our providers and their ability to meet the provisions in this bill while also adhering to federal regulations and continuing to receive federal funding. So after we came before the committee and recommended some amendments, which thank you to Representative Epley for hearing those are included in the bill that has been introduced this year. And we feel like it is a good constructive bill that is a compromise for both sides where we can ensure patient visitation rights while also upholding providers' ability to continue meeting federal requirements and continue receiving federal funding. So for those reasons, we are in support of HB 2548, and I am happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right, thank you very much. Committee, you'll also note that you have written-only testimony and support from Amy Bird, Director of Meadowlark Hospice. That should be in there. So right now, are there questions currently for any of the proponents? All right, seeing none, thank you all for being here today. And then you have written only as neutral, Tara Mays, Vice President, State Legislative Affairs, Kansas Hospital Association, Nicole Milo, System Director of Government and Community Affairs, Mountain Region Common Spirit Health. At this time, that will close the hearings on House Bill 2548. Is there objection to working House Bill 2548 today? All right, seeing none, Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify this. I'd like to move that we pass out House Bill 2548 favorably.
Seconded by Representative Ruiz. Discussion, comments, Representative Epley. Huh? Representative Barth, did you have a question? All right.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually had a question about, so a hospital today as it stands, are they able to deny visitation of patients?
If a patient what?
To visit a patient?
To visit a patient? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
They
Is
currently
Tara,
can.
Is Tara out here? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Tara. Would you have an answer for that?
Yeah.
So it's from someone besides those of us that are not working in hospitals.
Yeah, it's Tara Mays with the Kansas Hospital Association. To your question, Representative, it depends on the hospital's policies, and those are specific to each individual institutions. But by and large, if there's some sort of security breach or something like that, there are means and mechanisms for folks to deny visitation in certain circumstances. But certainly, that's not our preference in any case for any care across the board. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead. So with, it's page 2, 34 through 37, where it talks about visitation policies and procedures adopted under this section shall not contain more stringent infection control protocols for visitors than for employees of the patient care facility who are providing direct care to patients. So I guess my question on that is, can they say, well, this person that wants to visit them is not vaccinated or something else like that would deny a normal person to be able to visit someone who is dying alone? I don't know who can answer that question. It just seems like it leaves a little bit of a way open door there that I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah, Jenna Moyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's currently no requirement in Kansas law that individual employees of a facility are required to be vaccinated against certain illnesses. However, the way that this usually would work out would be they may ask if you are vaccinated, and if you're not, they'll likely ask you to wear a mask. And that seems to be the policy that most patient care facilities have adopted.
Is that it? Did you have another question, Representative Barr?
You can go and proceed with somebody else if you want to. Let me think through if I have others.
Okay. Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have an amendment that I'd like the revisor to pass out.
Okay, why don't we take and do this, if you'll just withdraw that at this time, and I'll call on
I withdraw.
Representative Burkamp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is probably maybe for the revisor, but so under Part C, where it talks about a patient care facility shall not. So if the person's taken to the hospital like in an ER and they're unconscious and they can't designate somebody to come visit them, the hospital, I guess, would then be able to deny, even if it's like their husband or wife, if they're not power of attorney. Is that, am I reading that right, or am I reading that wrong?
I don't think that would happen, because you don't have to have a power of attorney as a husband or wife to.
I was just reading it how it's written now, where it said, to me, it looks like the patient has to designate it, but if they can't designate it and they don't have a power of attorney.
What line are you on?
26 through 28.
Revisor Moyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this would be to receive visitation from someone who is not among that list of immediate family member, domestic partner, agent for healthcare decisions, or essential caregiver, minister, priest. So if the individual wanted to designate their neighbor to come visit them, they would either have to have the capacity to make that decision or have a healthcare proxy to designate someone to be able to come visit them.
I see what you're saying. Okay, I'm good.
All right. Representative Epley. Now we're back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll try again. I do have an amendment for this bill, and it's kind of clerical more than anything else. And if the committee members, as you get a copy of this, you'll read along in the bill, you'll see the changes. It is on the first page. First page, line 25. And this was because of some stakeholder input that we inserted this. And it's on line 25 that we insert, when providing end-of-life care, comma, a patient care facility shall not. So we just wanted to have that specified, that it's end-of-life care. So that's specified going forward in the bill. Then on page 2, there was some confusion about an arbitrary number of 2 on line, and that's on line 7. If you read along, it says visitation from 2 individuals at a time. I'm not sure exactly how that evolved to 2, but the better wording, so we're not arbitrary, is 1 or more. So we're inserting 1 or more in the place of 2. And we're going to strike the line above that on line 6 because that's already specified earlier in the bill that it is providing end-of-life care, and it's redundant to say who's terminally ill or receiving end-of-life care. So that's to be struck on line 6 and insert 1 or more on line 7. And then finally on the third page, because there was some confusion about who would be accessing this website if there were a complaint of care or a violation of care, it's to make it more clear language that it would be family members or individuals involved would be able to access a website and or a link to report complaints alleging violations of this section. So that's all. We just wanted to make it clear that it's the patient's family or caregiver or whoever could access this link to report a violation if they felt they'd been wrongfully aggrieved during the care of their loved one, as it pertains to visitation or whatever. So that's why that language was put in there on page 3. And I'm happy to try to answer questions about the amendments, but I think they're pretty straightforward.
So did you make a motion for an amendment?
I did move that earlier,
All
yes,
right.
ma'am. I moved that
Second?
we
Clifford
amend
seconds.
2548.
Seconded by Representative Clifford. I just didn't recall us having a second, so. All right, so now we're on the amendment. Committee, are there questions or comments? I might note, and Jenna, correct me if I'm wrong, but on page 3, where you're seeing the colons, semicolons, the A and B, those are technical changes from the revisor, correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it makes it a little more clear that the Department of Health and Environment has 2 things that are listed there.
Questions or comments on the amendment? Representative McDonald, excuse me.
So with this amendment, does this really limit the scope of being left alone to end-of-life care? Does that make sense? Like, before we put this amendment, would it be just across the board? You can have visitors, we can't deny you visitors, or I'm just confused. Because we inserted when providing end-of-life care on the
Well,
first.
the entire bill deals with end-of-life care. It doesn't deal with other care.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, are there further questions or comments on the Epley amendment? All right. Did you have one, Representative Barth?
I do, yes,
Okay.
please. Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, I want to make sure that I understand, because what Representative McDonald said was kind of my question, too. So by adding the amendment to line 25 on page 1, when it says, when providing end-of-life care, a patient care facility shall not. And so that means everything else in the bill only applies to end-of-life care, because how I read the bill before did not seem to apply to just end-of-life care. So I want to make sure legally that that is the case.
I can respond, or you can't respond.
Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that capacity to respond. Originally, the bill was intended for end-of-life care only, as it was worded on page 2, on the language that was struck for end-of-life for terminally ill patients. And that's always been the original intent of this bill, is for end-of-life care. And that's why it's placed where it is now at 25C on page 1 when it says, when providing end-of-life care. This is not meant to involve a patient bill of rights or anything like that. This is about when a patient is dying, what their rights are, especially after what we lived through during the pandemic. So that's why we're trying to make that language clear now in this bill through this amendment process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Barth.
I guess my main concern, too, is that we're possibly offering more limitations on patients still than what I would like to see from the perspective of end-of-life care or just visitation in general. There's a lot of restrictions in here, and it's not clear to me what the policies would be or are, and it really takes away a lot of ability. Like right here, it just says that there's immunity from the facilities from civil liability, which is a concern for me too, because we don't know what the other things could be from policies, from circumstances, from what the CDC says, what CMS says. Like, I feel like this kind of traps us. And then also, if I look on line 17 on page 3, where it says supersedes any federal law, I feel like that's unconstitutional with our 10th Amendment rights for the states. And so I guess I just want to clarify those things.
Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, this bill is solely arisen out of the pandemic when people were dying from COVID-19. Now, heaven help us, we'll never have another pandemic like that again, but this bill is a narrowly crafted bill to deal with end of life. This is not meant to branch out into other aspects of care. And again, Representative Barth, and I mean this as respectfully as I can, you know, we had to craft this bill with this language because we had a lot of stakeholder input about the immunity provisions, about the individual laws that pertain to each hospital, each facility. They're vastly different on their visitation policies. We have to be respectful of that. We can't come in and put the hammer down of government and say one size fits all. This is crafted to make folks aware that we have to respect the end of life and the capacity that goes with that with visitation. However, we have to be respectful of federal law, state law, and also the policies of those individual hospitals, healthcare facilities, and that's why it's crafted in the way it is. I think to try to go beyond that is going to then go the other way, and you're going to have a lot of stakeholder blowback. And you weren't involved with this, but we had a lot of stakeholder input the first time we ran this bill, and that's why the bill is carefully crafted with the language that's in there now that you are raising some questions about, and I understand.
Yeah, keeping, and Representative Epley is the author of this, and, I think he's made legislative intent very clear. This is just about end-of-life issues. We're not going back and revisiting everything that we did with some of the language that was done during the COVID epidemic that we had. where we came in and put different safeguards in, and those statutes are still on the books.
Yeah, and I appreciate those. And I just want to protect the end of life for people not dying alone. I just think there's some things in here that seem a little bit more restrictive that I'm just not comfortable with.
Okay.
That, to me, seem a little bit more, and I'm just not comfortable with some of the language of it right now.
All right, thank
But I
you.
appreciate the information, though. Thank you.
All right. Representative Blacks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, we've got definitions on the first page that essential caregiver, immediate family. Do we need a definition of providing end-of-life care? Because, and I suspect that most of us know that, but there may be some questions, because I noticed on page 2, we've lined out who is terminally ill on line 6, but yet it's terminally ill on line 19 is still there. I mean, obviously, everybody, when they get into a hospice situation, pretty well assumes that's end of life, but not always. I guess, do we need that, or is that understood enough?
What line were you on, Representative?
Well,
19?
basically,
On
no,
page
there's
2.
not a definition of end of life. I guess, who's determined that?
Do we have that? I don't believe that Representative, to the best of our knowledge, the revisor is going to double check, but I don't believe that we currently have in statute what end of life is. And I think from my experiences of dealing with a lot of seniors, is that can mean a whole lot of things. And I think if we were to try to go in and define something like that today, we could probably make some major errors on that. But I understand where you're coming from, but I think I would, like I say, it could take on different paths for different people.
All right, thank you for that.
Uh-huh. Representative Epley.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Blex, you raised a really good point, because it is a little inconsistent, because I've been a hospice director for 25 years, and some people don't die in a day or two. They die sometimes in a year or two, and they're on hospice all that time, and they're felt to be terminally ill. So that's not the intent of this bill. But certainly, Representative, you raise a good point. It's inconsistent with the language that we struck up above on line 6, because when you go to line 19, terminally ill, in all fairness, should probably be struck there also. And we could make another, but it should be just end-of-life care, because that is a very narrow-crafted bill. That's the intent of the bill, and certainly, Representative Blex, you raised an excellent point of inconsistency in the wording of the bill, and we might have another amendment maybe to strike that out too. But right now, we're on this amendment, and I appreciate your careful observation.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Even a blind hog finds an acorn every now and then, my grandpa used to say.
All right, on the amendment, Representative McDonald, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
It's one of those days that my tongue's
It's
not
okay.
operating.
It's okay.
Like it should.
On this amendment, I really do appreciate that we moved end-of-life care up within the bill. I might even suggest that we put it somewhere within the description, because it says certain circumstances, which is pretty vague, and that might really get to the point. Thank you.
Committee, further questions on the amendment? All right, seeing none, Representative Epley, you may close.
I close.
Motion made by Representative Epley, seconded by Representative Clifford on the Epley amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. Back on the bill. Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To try and lend clarity to this, for the excellent observations, blind hogs or not, on line 17, on the first page, where it has a 3, and it reads, quote, patient means an individual who is receiving, insert the phrase end of life in between receiving care. So end of life care at or is at a resident of a patient care facility. So we just insert the words end of life. And apparently strike also or is a resident of. Then I think it's more clear for everyone of what our intent is with the bill.
All right, you've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Clifford seconds.
Seconded by Representative Clifford. On the amendment, discussion, comments?
Does that help?
You're good? Okay. All right, seeing none, Representative Epley, you may close.
I close.
All right, you've all heard the motion by Representative Epley, seconded by Representative Clifford. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. Back on the bill. Is there any further discussion or comments on the bill as amended? All right, seeing Representative Epley, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think this is an important bill after what we've just gone through the last few years, and I'm sorry it's a little painstaking to get the wording where it is, but I appreciate you hanging in there. And so with that, Madam Chair, I would like to move that we pass out House Bill number 2548 favorably for passage as amended.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. That advances our bill. All right, committee, we will now open up the second hearing that we've got for House Bill 2637, expanding eligibility for rural emergency hospital licensure to facilities that meet criteria at any point after 2015. Revisor Moyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2637 is a bill that amends KSA 65484, and this applies to rural emergency hospitals. This licensure was passed in 2021, and initially the date at which a facility had to meet this criteria for rural emergency hospitals was tied to December 27, 2020. However, in December of 2023, a bill was introduced in the Senate that would amend this definition to expand it from January 2015 to December 2020, and this is at the federal level. And so in anticipation of expanding this timeline, this legislation was crafted so that a facility who wishes to apply for a rural emergency hospital licensure could do so if they meet that criteria between January 2015 and December 2020, or if that facility became a department of or a provider of a provider-based entity. And then there's also additional new language in Section 2 and Section 3 that would allow for a contingent effective date, which would mean that this bill would only go into effect upon passage by the United States Congress signing into law. This federal legislation is when this would go into effect.
Basically grandfathering, which was a piece that they didn't do in their original legislation. Some of those that already right-sized themselves.
Yes.
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 All right, questions of the revisor? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Jenna. All right, committee, we have one proponent, Tara Mays, Vice President, State Affairs, Legislative Affairs, Kansas Hospital Association. Welcome back to committee.
Hi, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tara Mays with the Kansas Hospital Association. Grateful for the opportunity to speak in favor of House Bill 2637. Really, this bill was born out of a concept that this esteemed committee actually brought up when we were working House Bill 2261 back in February of 2021. If you all will recall that time, I was before you testifying on the rural emergency hospital designation. And if you are sensing a theme this afternoon, it's that you're very smart people. And what we heard at that time was, how come we're not extending this to hospitals that may have already closed? And so during that hearing, you mentioned that. And at the time, I said that we do not have any matching federal language on that particular concept. So good news and bad news, as Jenna mentioned, there is now matching language introduced in Senate Bill 3394 in Washington, D.C., introduced by Senator Jerry Moran. The bad news is, as Jenna mentioned, mentioned, that bill has not been passed yet. So this legislation is in enactment upon the federal legislation. This is in fact one of those efforts to ensure that we could continue the momentum should anything happen in Washington, D.C., that the hospitals in Kansas would be ready to take advantage of that rural emergency hospital program. Currently, across the nation, there are 19 rural emergency hospitals, and there is one designated here in the state of Kansas in South Central Kansas Medical Center in our Kansas City. And then there is another hospital that is very close to being designated as a rural emergency hospital at this time. This bill would extend that to 5 other hospitals across the state of Kansas. As you'll remember, the rural emergency hospital model allows for a 24/7 ER to provide initial assessment and stabilization services, and then they can provide and transfer services. They do have some stipulations around inpatient beds in the state of Kansas. We believe the extension of this designation could be helpful as more of our hospitals in Kansas explore this option and as DC considers eligibility options in the future. So with that, Madam Chair, I am happy to stand for questions.
All right. Questions for Tara? Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Tara. I appreciate that very much. I just wanted to ask a quick question. I think what's on my mind, being from rural Kansas, is rural hospital closures are devastating. And a bill like, can you hear me? And a bill like this, for a rural hospital that closed during 2015 to 2020 could be resurrected with the federal funds, correct?
They could be resurrected
potentially
as a rural emergency hospital.
Okay, and but then the unintended consequences is what I'm worried about. For instance, in my district, there are 2 small hospitals in a rural area, about 12 miles apart. One of them closed because of population decline and reimbursement, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's one functioning hospital that is barely making it. So if the other hospital is that lost out and closed rises back up, it would be competing. They would be competing for providers, for patients, redundancy of services. I'm just not sure that the non-rural emergency hospital would be able to survive. And I was wondering if you had any comment on that and whether there could be unintended consequences and how we could alleviate any unintended consequences. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great question. You know, as we know, our hospitals throughout the state of Kansas, and we represent 123 community hospitals across the state, it is very important for all of them to have access points to care. And in particular, the rural emergency hospital is designed to be a stabilization center. So we don't know that that's necessarily always a competition, because the rural emergency hospital model really allows flexibility in terms of that 24/7 emergency care that I mentioned, but then each of the hospitals would then decide if there are certain services that their community needs. And I would hope that all of those hospitals would take into account what those surrounding hospitals offer and offer tandem things and services to their patients and their communities that fit well so that the community of care really can continue to be healthy in the entire region of the state. But this would follow kind of the more federal language, which is really what we see working best across the state.
Madam Chair, thank you. Just one other quick question. If we, and hypothetically, if we were to provide an amendment that said there could not be a competing hospital within 35 miles, for instance, for a rural emergency hospital application, and that is more restricted than whatever federal language might be coming down from the federal government, would that hinder implementation of this at all because it was more restrictive than the federal law that might be passed hypothetically? Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, I appreciate that question. We believe that if you were to put in similar mileage requirements, one, we've seen on the critical access model side of things that can create some complications for hospitals. But in addition to that, we do believe that it could have some unfortunate consequences for those that are currently already looking at the rural emergency hospital model right now in the state of Kansas because they would not fit the parameter that you've designated in terms of mileage requirement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But just to be, and I don't want to belabor this, but I do have a constituent hospital in my district. It seems like there's a redundancy of services that could be an unintended consequence of, we have a situation, sort of survival of the fittest, two small hospitals, and one wins and one doesn't, and so one's able to survive, but then we resurrect the one that did win, and now they're both on the verge of collapse because of limited resources. I just hope that we can do something that doesn't create this unintended consequence. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Blex.
Yeah, I would echo that. That's obviously what the representative's talking about. It's also in my district too, and certainly they've torn down part of the old Hospital of Mercy, but I seen that early on when we have one hospital 10 or 12 miles. They're spending $2 million for an imaging equipment and another one doing the same thing, competing for that same population. And then you got a shrinking population in the county. And obviously, a motel with a 50% vacancy is going to go broke. I mean, it's just simple fact. And so I can see where he's coming from. And, I think the model that we now have in the City of Independence is working well, mainly because of the emergency services, and that's working well and doing well, and probably I don't hear the complaints in my district about that, the loss of the hospital. Certainly 190 good paying jobs is a devastating blow to the community, and that's kind of went past. I mean, so now they're worried about keeping what facilities they have and having an emergency room and have an agreement with level 2 to be able to transport those over is not always convenient, but it's working. And so I do think there's a valid concern about over-competing for something. I don't know how to address that, but the cost of running a hospital, I don't need to tell you, is very expensive. So, maybe it's something that we should think about. And certainly hopefully the federal legislation will get that right too. But I agree with my colleague, that was an issue on our situation down there. Thank you.
I guess I would kind of think that not only is it expensive to run, but I think it would be very expensive to resurrect. And if if you're a good business person, you're going to have to look at that competing hospital that's there. I don't think it would be feasible. That doesn't mean that your concerns are invalid, and I'm not saying that. But are there further questions? Oh, Representative Reese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tara, I seem to recall that we received maybe a one-page handout or some kind of a handout that would kind of define rural emergency hospitals and the services that would be provided there. Do you have that, or I don't remember if you gave that to us or somebody gave it to us?
I am certain, Madam Chair, that we have the one-page handout that explains the rural emergency hospital that I'd be happy to provide to the committee.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Committee, are there further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Tara, very much. All right, committee, we have written-only testimony from Rochelle Colombo, Alex Freeman, Managing Intern, League of Kansas Municipalities, and Drew Talbot, President, Ascension Via Christi, Pittsburgh. At that time, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 2637. Is there objection to working House Bill 2637? Seeing none, Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move that we pass out House Bill 2637 as presented today.
Second by Representative Reese. Discussion, comments on House Bill 2637? All right, seeing none, Representative Epley, you may close.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Epley, seconded by Representative Reese. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. Bill passes. All right, committee, we've got, what did I do with my? We're going to open up House Bill 2547, which is authorizing schools to maintain certain emergency medication kits and to administer such medication in emergency situations. We held the hearing on that on 1/30. So what's the committee's desire? Representative Epley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move that the committee pass out House Bill 2547.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Reese. Discussion, comments on the bill. All right, seeing none, Representative Epley, you may close.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Epley, seconded by Representative Reese to pass out 2547 favorably as for passage. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. Okay, now committee, we're going to look at House Bill 2453 that we heard on 12524. What's the committee's desires? Representative Epley. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the enacting the dentist and dental hygienist compact to provide interstate practice privileges for dentists and dental hygienists. Discussion, comments, amendments? All right, seeing none, Representative Epley, you may close. Second was Reese. Representative Epley.
Did I make the motion?
You already did it.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Epley, seconded by Representative Reese to advance House Bill 2453 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. All right, committee, that concludes the business that we have today. And again, keep your eyes watching your stuff coming through the email. Also, listen to us at the mic. If we set up bills, Dave will make sure that all the members get that in advance. Because if you recall, in the last few days, yesterday and then before we broke for the weekend, we had bills come in that are still in the drafting process. We have this week, next week, and then Monday and Tuesday of the week after that for any bills that we want advanced to be out of this committee. So we're running up against deadlines. So we'll be moving very quickly. If anyone's got questions, feel free to call Dave. He just loves to have people bug him all day long. I know that for a fact. And he's very kind when he is. So is there any questions or? All right, seeing none, committee, we are adjourned until